All right, so part two, the core financial components. So before we dive into the specifics there, a quick overview of the settings we have in our league. We do have a salary cap, it's 100 million. I'm not sure exactly what the setting, I can't remember what the exact setting name is, but we have there's a setting that allows you to keep teams constrained to their budgets, meaning they can never spend over their budget amount. We have that turned off. So if you have cash in the bank, you can overspend your budget and draw out of that cash. And to that end, the cash is capped at 40 mil each year. So if your team is gushing cash, your owner will take anything above 40 million from your team, put it in the bank, and you'll start next year with 40 million. And if you're under 40 million, you'll just keep whatever you had at the end of the previous season. And you may have noticed occasionally owners will actually deposit cash into teams that are struggling as well. So that can certainly happen also. So I think the number one question we all have in our minds when we look at the finances and we want to do some planning in the finances is how much money can I spend? And there's three independently operating components to the financial model out of the park. One is the salary cap, which is by far the most simple. Then there's the concept of a budget and kind of what goes into that budget and what happens when you go over the budget. And then there's cash. And so how do you make cash? How do you increase your cash? How much cash will you have in the future? Things like that. So, but the bottom line is, if you're looking for the quick answer of how much money can you spend, the answer is whatever your budget is plus whatever cash you have. That's how much you can spend on total team expenses before your owner will step in and stop you from spending more. Or the budget, depending on whichever is greater. So there could be situations where the budget that's been given to your team could exceed. You may start the season with negative cash, in which case you will be constrained to that budget. And then I put in parentheses because we're in a cap league, assuming any players you acquire as part of this process keep you under the cap, right? So any acquisitions over the cap are clearly going to inhibit your spending as well. So what's the salary cap? This is by far the most simple. It's composed of all the active player salary and then all your retained player salary, right? So the only thing the salary cap cares about, or the only numbers that the game cares about when it's calculating salary cap, is how much do you have in your payroll. And the only time that something counts against your payroll that doesn't represent an actual player is if you've traded a player away and you are retaining salary. It's important to note that the salary cap is not composed of any released player salary. So you could have the most expensive player in the league, release them, and that entire salary amount will be cleared off of your cap. You may not be able to afford to add more players to your team, right? Because you may be constrained by other things, which we'll look at in a moment. But the cap doesn't care. It just cares about what's on your salary at any given moment in time. So the budget, the most important thing to know about the budget is it's an arbitrary amount. I should probably put arbitrary with an asterisk because I do think that the better your team does, and if you're doing well as a team, you're managing your finances generally pretty well, your budget will continue to go up. But it will change a little bit year by year, and I think there is a randomness factor into how much you get allotted each year. And the budget covers all your salary, right? So that includes your active salary, your retained salary, so same as the cap, but it also includes your inactive salary. So if you do cut that player, it's no longer counting against your cap, but it does count against your budget. It also covers what the game kind of counts as expenses, general expenses. The main ones as it relates to expenses that we have control over on some level are scouting expenses, right? So that's set by the GM anywhere between 1 million and 15 million. So that counts against the budget. And then all the salary that your team, or of all the staff that manages your team. So we don't have coaches, but if we did have coaches, coach salary would be against that. But the scout has a salary. I think anywhere between a few $100,000. I think some of the scouts make over $1 million. And the GM has a salary, and I think the wages for the GMs are kind of the same too. So if you're one of the long-term general managers, you've been in the league for a long time, I've noticed, and I can't remember where to find this in the software, but I have noticed that some of the GMs are making over $1 million a year. So that does actually count against your budget as well. Just something worth noting. And then you've got your cash, and I think the best way to think about cash is sort of cash flow, right? So every year, your team makes revenue. It spends money on player expenses, on scouts, on scouting, and on salaries. And then every year, at the end of the year, if you've, it subtracts expenses from revenue, and that's how much goes into your cash. Revenue, as you can guess, is composed of gate revenue, season tickets, regular tickets, playoff revenue, media revenue, merchandising revenue. We have very little control over media and merchandising revenue. The more popular players you have on your team, the more merchandising revenue you're going to make. The more popular your team is, and the better you're doing, the more tickets you're going to sell. We do have some control over our ticket prices. But generally speaking, and if you look at historical numbers, believe it or not, your ticket prices don't have a huge impact on your overall cash. Maybe plus and minus, I'm going to say 5 million, maybe more in some more extreme cases with some very, very popular teams that have large markets, have consistently draw large crowds. They might have bigger swings, but I've had tickets as low as $10 and tickets as high as $16, and I think it's affected my revenue by about 5 million swing, which in the grand scheme of things is quite small. And then expenses are composed of active player salaries, inactive player salaries, scouting expenses, staff expenses. So we already kind of covered that. And then the amount of cash you have in the bank is the rolling total of your profitability over time. So pretty straightforward stuff. Profitability is simply the annual summary of revenue minus expenses. And then whatever cash you ended last year with, you add or subtract what you made this year, and now you have a new cash value going into next year. And as we mentioned before, cash is capped at 40 million. So just to kind of recap, how much money can I spend? Your total budget plus your cash, or your budget, whichever is greater. So that's it for part 2. In part 3, we'll look at how budget and cash work together.